Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Jeff, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2023 Toyota Highlander Hybrid Platinum. So this is one of the more fully loaded options. This is one of the most luxurious technology-packed, reliability-packed, because it's got the Toyota badge, of course, and a few other things that I'll be going over with you. This also has the all-wheel drive E, which is an important distinction because of some of the changes that you have versus the other all-wheel drive options, but of course we'll get all into that later. So first we're going to talk about the exterior, talk about the engine and the hybrid powertrain a bit, then move to the interior, and then we'll take it for a drive. So let's go ahead and let's get started with the exterior first. This color is called Blueprint. Toyota has been doing a lot of stuff lately where they try to make a pun with the name, including things like track bread on the GR86. But this is Blueprint, the dark blue that almost looks black at night. And then on the front here, we have some different styling options, including a silver lower bumper here, which I think, even though Toyota calls it silver, I believe this is supposed to be reminiscent just to sort of tell people that this is Platinum because this is specific to the Platinum trim level. We also have some black sort of filled in grille guards here, and then we do have the chrome. Now this is what I want to draw your attention to for a sec, because this has the blue highlights around the Toyota badge, and that's because that is the universal symbol for Toyota and Lexus to tell you that this is actually a hybrid vehicle. So that's a pretty cool touch if you're ever looking at a vehicle and just want to know without looking for badges or anything like that. That's the fastest way to know that it's a hybrid. So let's go around the side of the vehicle here. We have some fairly large wheels here that are, again, not necessarily partial to the Platinum, but typical as the 20-inch sort of alloys for the bigger Highlander models in black trim. We have our all-wheel drive badge, which is kind of interesting because it doesn't have the E on it, even though it's mostly like a part-time system. You have your normal keyless entry, the mirrors fold in whenever you need them. You got some pseudo roof racks that you can kind of use that are also kind of that silver or platinum color. One of the really interesting things I like is if we're looking at this quarter panel here. So this quarter panel, we have this big swoopy line you see right here as part of the bodywork. And what's cool about that is that's almost becoming like Toyota design language. When you think of things like the Toyota Supra, the Toyota Sienna, a lot of the Toyota lineup is starting to implement this line, and so it's almost becoming synonymous with Toyota. So that's kind of a cool little thing. We'll come around to the back of the vehicle here. Pretty typical. So we have Highlander, we have our Platinum badging, and then lastly we have our hybrid badging and another Toyota with the bluing, just reminding us in fact that this is actually a hybrid vehicle. So let's talk about the back for a second. So one of the cool things about this vehicle is if the vehicle is locked, for instance, this does have the foot mechanism. So we'll go ahead and lock our Highlander, go ahead and lock up here, put our foot under, everything will go ahead and open up there. And then now you have easy access to the back of your Highlander. So that's a pretty cool feature, and everything is powered, so you can just push the button and that'll just drop back down. So that's a cool little exterior feature that you can use. If you're getting groceries, if it's raining, whatever is happening, that's why the car's a little bit wet. We've had some cold, wet weather here in Phoenix lately, but let's go ahead and let's talk about the hybrid powertrain that's in this vehicle, because after all, if you're going to be purchasing a vehicle like this for the hybrid, you're definitely going to be curious to know what all is going on under the hood. So, okay, so let's go ahead and pop our hood here and take a look at what's going on with the hybrid system. Obviously, that's a pretty important thing to know when driving a hybrid vehicle. You kind of want to know the get up and what's going on under here. Another thing I want to point is this little stick here. You actually have your sort of standard stick pop, which you might be expecting your sort of head struts that might hold it up for you. But typically when you think about hybrids, a lot of things like that from the Toyota lineup, typically they try to keep things as simple as possible. That helps, of course, with things not breaking so much, but it can also help with weight sometimes. So that's a pretty interesting thing there. So we have right away, we can see our bright orange cable, which tells us that we have a hybrid or an EV electrical system in the cars. Those are federally mandated to be added in there, just to sort of show what's the high voltage lines per se. This is a 4-cylinder, of course, mated with our hybrid electric motor. So what we have here is a 2.5 liter that makes about 186 horsepower in its own, along with the 2 synchronous magnetic motors. This makes a combined output of 243 horsepower and about 175 pound-feet of torque. So that's what you're working with there. Not the most powerful vehicle in the world, but I can tell you from driving it, which we'll get into more later, it's got plenty of get up and go when you need it to. It's fine. It moves the weight of the vehicle, which is about 4,500 pounds. So that's kind of what you're looking at there. But a pretty interesting engine. Obviously, it shuts off, turns on, and turns off as it needs. And let's talk about that all-wheel drive system that I mentioned earlier. Obviously, we're looking at this motor. So the way this is set up, this is actually set up to be essentially part-time all-wheel drive with a front-wheel drive priority. So what happens is this is all connected to a CVT-E transmission, and so that is providing power to the front wheels the whole time. Now, one of the electric motors sits on the rear wheels, which means as it needs it, if the car feels like it needs to get traction, it'll then send power to that electric motor in the rear, and then that'll allow you to get your all-wheel drive traction, which means they don't actually have to run a drive shaft all the way back there. They just have that electric motor that's on standby when it needs to be used, and the CVT-E, along with everything that's shoved up here, just provides power to the front wheels at all times. So, even though that's an important distinction between the all-wheel drive E and then the other all-wheel drive systems that are available with some of the other powertrains like the turbo models and things like that. But that's pretty much a quick look. We've talked about the exterior, the hybrid powertrain. Now let's get into the interior and then we'll take it for a drive. Okay, so now we're in the interior of the 2023 Toyota Highlander Platinum, which is an important distinction because that's going to change some of the things we find on the exterior. We have our JBL speakers, which are pretty obvious. They stand out a little bit, but we have a very sort of luxurious, maybe even borderline EV feeling interior. We have this massive 12.3-inch screen here that has this volume and power knob way far away. If you're sitting fully back in your seat, I'm about 6 foot and I still can't reach that with my wingspan. But that's a pretty interesting feature in being that it's got all this piano black going on in it. But we have a lot going on here with the climate control system. To touch on this briefly, essentially you have a dual side climate control, so you can have your passenger have their own temp separate from what the driver has, along with a ton of buttons, including both heated and ventilated seats in the front. Another cool part is you can actually control the rear of the car as well, separately from what's happening in the front. So Toyota likes to refer to it to essentially as a three-way adjustable climate control, which is a pretty interesting, or a three-zone. Another thing is this little cubby here that is a change from previous Highlander models is this. This is our Qi wireless charger. One of the cool things about this charger is the fact that this actually works through a case. I've seen some other wireless chargers that didn't work through my case, but this one actually charges my phone through the case, which is really impressive, even though it's not typically recommended. I thought that was a pretty cool feature, and it's moved where it used to be in the center console. They've moved it here, and I think that's a much better spot. I don't forget my phone as much, and if it's charging, it's pretty easy and convenient. We have some faux wood as well. It's this sort of gray color that remains fairly neutral throughout the car, but I think it looks pretty good. Some USB Type-C chargers, including a regular USB, and of course, we still have our cigarette lighter ports as well. And then, of course, we have the steering wheel. The steering wheel is standard Toyota. This has all of the standard buttons that you would find on a lot of the other Toyota models, including being able to address the multi-informational display, which in this case is a 10-inch digital full-color display that has a lot of different modes we'll be talking about later. Your cruise control, your volume adjustment, which I like that they have the volume adjustment button here. You just don't get to adjust it as fast as moving the actual dial. So I kind of hate that the dial is just out of reach of me being able to grab it over there. But then to my left knee here, we have a bunch of other buttons, including the auto headlights. We have the view for the cameras, so you can actually do the drop-down views. That'll help with navigating parking lots and things like that, where you can adjust the camera to pull it out. And then, of course, we have the AC. There's an AC vent in the back hatch that you can activate, so if you need power on like a camping trip or whatever, that's back there. You got a hood pop, and then you got the heated steering wheel. So the heated steering wheel is a nice touch, obviously, in normal heated steering wheel fashion. It hovers around right here, and then of course this has a heads-up display as well. And then our shifter, this is for our CVT, so this is kind of optimistic by having the sport mode, because if you're familiar with CVTs don't actually have gears, so it's kind of a simulated experience, and then you move that through. There's no paddle shifters on this car, but that's the way that is. Now we have some more buttons here in the middle, and these are some of the more exciting buttons. We have a trail mode, we have our EV mode, we have our traction control off, and then we have some parking brake and holding brake bits, and then we have our drive mode select, which I'll talk about once we start driving the vehicle a little bit more, which just goes through sport, norm, and eco. Then there's this thing. This thing is really cool. So this, you can actually slide back, and it has to bend to sort of form itself in there, but we have this cool blend, and it's actually really deep. My arm can pretty much go all the way in there, if you take a look. So it's super deep. You can hide hydro flasks in there if you wanted to. Whatever you wanted to fit, you could probably fit it in there. And then it just rotates back out, and it fits flush. It looks pretty. It's kind of a nice touch there. I like the way it's set up, but that's pretty much a quick look. Everything else is fairly standard. You do have buttons to move the mirrors in, which means if you're off-roading, worried about trees, narrow parking spots, whatever, move the mirrors in, which it kind of does anyways once you park the vehicle. But that's a lot of the sort of major features. And then let's not forget to touch on this real fast. This is the normal sort of roof mirror or sun mirror. This is all fully adjustable. You can turn it into a convertible, move it, close it, open up the interior, even though this is already a very spacious interior. But one of the most important distinctions about the Platinum Highlander is perhaps some of the seating changes that happen in the rear that make this luxurious SUV with all of its benefits so much different than some of the other Highlander trim levels. So let me hop in the back seat and then we'll talk about that some more. Okay, so now I'm sitting in the back of the 2023 Highlander Platinum, and let's talk about what's going on here. So there's actually no seat right here, and that's because the Platinum is actually a 7-row setup. So you have your 3rd row seats back here, but in the middle, we actually have captain's chairs, which makes it a lot more comfortable. I think the Highlander Platinum does a good job of really setting itself apart as being the luxurious option, sort of more focused for adults. Maybe you don't have so much as kids anymore, or maybe they're full-grown kids, and now you're looking for a bit more comfort in your SUV. Now what that does come with is that it has heated seats. We have our 3rd zone climate control, which is for the back, we talked a little bit about earlier. You have 2 big cup holders and even a storage spot here, which is nice. These seats of course have lots of adjustability to be moved forward and backwards, and they're just way more comfortable. You have a decent amount of headroom back here. It feels like you can adjust the front seats to drop them a little bit more, which is pretty nice. But the fact that the moonroof, sunroof extends back here, it actually makes it so it still opens up the space a lot more. You know, it almost feels like driving through Jurassic Park, I would say, for example. You got some vents on the side here, including a light, almost like being in an airplane that you can turn on and turn off as you please. And then one of the other cool features for doing things like road trips, or maybe you just live in Phoenix like me, you can actually put on that sunshade as well, which is actually snuck into there. So it's almost like having a minivan, but with all of the SUV benefits, which is a pretty cool thing here. Now behind me being the cargo hold, this is also where you would find the 3rd row seatings. Now with the 3rd row seats up, you really only get about 16 cubic feet of space. You can see about where it ends here. There's really not much room. I would say you could almost fit only like 2 or 3 people's bags if you put everything in the back there. And then the car has about 14 cup holders total. There's actually 2 more on each side in the back. So they really try to fill everything up and make the most of all the space here. So what I would say is this vehicle with the current setup is really mostly intended to be used as a 4-person vehicle, or it just be used as your daily if you're going to be the only one sitting in it with that hybrid drivetrain, getting about a combined 35 miles per gallon, which is pretty good. And if you needed to go camping, for example, it actually has 3,500 pounds of towing capacity too, which is a pretty cool touch. But I think you make the most of the space by having the rear seats down. Then you can put whatever you want back there, groceries, even larger items, because you can actually fold these seats down as well if you wanted to do so for just a little bit more space. But that's the most of it. I think this is just a really good job of actually being a very sort of luxurious, soft riding vehicle with lots of technology that makes you just sort of appreciate your vehicle a little bit more and just kind of enjoy your driving experience that you share with your Highlander. But with that, let's talk about what it's like to drive the Highlander, and let's talk about some of the other sport modes and things like that. So let's hop in the front seat and then we'll go. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's take the Highlander for a drive. Go ahead and hit that push button start, put it in drive, and you'll notice there's no added engine noise. So on initial startup, of course, this being a hybrid, it just stays in EV mode, which you can actually activate, although in my experience with a lot of the EV modes, generally you have a little bit of a hard time getting to make it stay in EV mode if it has enough charge. So it's much better off just leaving it as a hybrid unless it's something like a plug-in hybrid, which this is not. So let's go ahead and let's get the nice click of the seat warmers and the heated steering wheel on because it is still cold. I can see my breath when I stand outside. So let's go ahead and let's take it for a drive. So first off, just right away, the driving impression, as far as just the standard normal mode, which of course is expected for use in everyday driving, is exactly what you think it would be. It's It's got Toyota's standard sort of steering feel, that very highly boosted power steering where the steering wheel can be turned very lightly with almost no effort, but that can make it, if that's something you prefer, that's to be expected here. As far as some of the braking and pedal feel, that of course feels exactly like almost any other hybrid on the market. The brake has that sort of either 90% or 3% feel of it. Whenever you apply brake, you're either 5% brake or 90% brake. It's got the same feel with the regenerative braking, so not a huge surprise there in terms of some of the added feel. As far as the actual ride quality though, it's actually really smooth. This vehicle stays very level. Even if you decide to go into some rain gutter bumps, it stays very level. You really don't even notice it at all. So that's one particular feature I really like about the car. It's very smooth, and that makes it a lot more enjoyable when you're not being thrown around in your SUV, because of course you do feel a little bit of body roll as you go into turns and things like that, because it is a little bit of a bigger SUV and it does have some heft to it, especially with those electric hybrid batteries. But let's go ahead and let's talk about some of the modes I mentioned earlier, and we'll start with possibly the most exciting, Sport Mode. So Sport Mode, it seems kind of ironic to have in a hybrid system like this, but Sport Mode, what it does is it actually sort of strengthens up the wheel a little bit. Earlier we talked about how overboosted it is. It makes the wheel feel a little bit heavier, a little bit tighter, to give you a sort of more direct input into how the vehicle responds. It'll help hold out some of the revs a little bit more in the vehicle, just to make it sort of ideal for, let's say, canyon carving and kind of cruising through if you were in some twisty tight roads that you wanted to have a little bit more fun with while driving your Highlander, right? So the next mode, of course, would be Eco. When you put it in Eco, it does exactly what you think it's going to do. It's actually going to limit your throttle input. So it's going to prevent you from getting too aggressive in terms of how quickly the car will accelerate. So it'll throttle it back. It'll remind you on your digital 10-inch display here as well. It'll say it has the sort of charge, eco, and then the power displays as well. So that'll stop you from getting too heavy into the pedal, which of course helps you save gas mileage at the end of the day, which this has that combined 35 rating of about 35 city and 34 highway. And if you're wondering where some of that change comes in, it obviously comes from the fact that this will shut off the engine if you're sitting at lights and things like that, just to make it that much more efficient, or even using EV mode when you're traveling pretty slowly. So that's where some of that benefit comes in. Now, earlier I mentioned that this has a little bit of a get up and go to it. It drives just fine when you kind of want to get on it. But the interesting part is the fact that it changes so much in terms of where the gas mileage is at. So in my experience with the car, it's been around 30 between kind of jumping on the freeway and jumping off, give or take. On longer road trips, you can have a better experience with more consistency. But here in Phoenix, with the different sort of hills that show up subtly in between getting in it and getting on it, I would expect more around 30 for regular driving, but maybe you're a little bit softer than I am and you can get better gas mileage that way. So that's kind of a cool feature. Then let's talk about some of the other modes. We briefly mentioned EV mode, which is, again, not really ideal. It'll start in EV mode and it will turn itself off in parking lots and things like that. You can use EV mode, generally suited for low speeds, or like I mentioned, usually just easiest not to mess with it at all, let the car choose when it's going to do that mode. Then there's the trail mode. The trail mode's an interesting one because it takes more advantage of the all-wheel drive system. It uses that integrated all-wheel drive. You can do a little bit more with it to make sure it is on top of the traction control. And that's interesting because Toyota actually recommends not using it at high-speed environments or when not using it in slippery trail environments. So that's a pretty interesting one, obviously suited for off-road or slippery wet conditions when you're driving a little bit slowly, maybe you're a little bit more nervous about what's happening there. The view is great in this car. The rear view mirror makes it feel like it's pretty far back, but this is a fairly large vehicle. The actual driving point of view is fantastic, and the speaker system sounds fantastic. Everything's pretty crisp and clear, and you could adjust everything in your massive 12.3-inch display here, should you be so inclined to do so. So that's a pretty nice feature. A lot of the buttons are really easy to use, fairly intuitive as long as the symbols and everything that they've added on. But what I don't like, again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, is that volume button. So the volume button is just out of reach. So if you're going into like a drive-through, for example, and you go, oh, let me turn down my radio real quick. and you have to, you know, lean over a little bit, which isn't a big deal. And like I said, you do have your volume buttons on the steering wheel. I just found it to be sort of an odd thing nonetheless. But the heated and ventilated seats are great. And another thing I forgot to mention is Eco Mode will actually throttle back your climate control if it feels like it's doing too much to go against your fuel economy. So in a time like Phoenix, in a place where we can reach 120 degrees, it's not the worst idea to actually sort of turn off climate control, or not put the car in Eco Mode, I should say, when you're worried about heat, because you don't want your climate control getting throttled back. But that's not really specific to this car. That's also a generic thing that you'll find in a lot of the various automatic climate controls, various hybrid cars and things like that will generally limit those types of items to improve it. So all in all, this is a fairly solid feeling car. You get a very smooth ride. This has a more luxurious feel to it, with lots of space that is available to either be used for daily driving and getting great fuel economy. Obviously, this is way better than any truck that you'll be finding currently. So it gets fantastic gas mileage there without needing to add any unnecessary stress to the overall driving experience. The space, if you need that third seating, is probably not ideal, and you should probably look into getting a bigger SUV if you really need to take advantage of all 7 seats. But there is another version if you need just one extra seat. There are some other versions of the Highlander that come with that full bench seat back row, and then you could still have the third row down. So there are some options from Toyota if that's what you're looking for your vehicle use case. But all in all, it's a pretty nice vehicle. It has lots of cool features, lots of technology. You have what you would expect from your Toyota Lexus options in terms of even possibly reliability. I don't have this car for a long-term loan, so I can't speak totally on that, but I can say that my time with the vehicle has been very nice. It's a very pleasant vehicle to drive with a heads-up display, all of the technology that you'd really be looking for. Luxury. The seats are actually really comfortable. There's a lot of cool features in this that I think are great for general use, and this makes it so that this is a comfortable vehicle you can drive every day and really use in any use case. It even has things, for example, like if you have a bag in the back seat, the car will actually remind you about that bag. So as you're getting out, it'll tell you to check the back seat. There's lots of cool little touches like that that just make it feel like this is a very well-equipped vehicle that's been designed to pretty much be maybe not best in any one particular instance, but a jack of all trades and be good at everything that it does. So you get great fuel economy, you have a nice interior with all of your Toyota qualities and all the new technologies. So that's what you get with the 2023 Highlander, especially because this particular version of the Highlander's been out for a little bit, that you have some nice upgraded quality of life changes, like that Qi charger that we mentioned earlier. The wireless charger has been moved just to make a better quality of life on the interior of the car. So that's generally what you experience, a nice easy driving style that offers pretty much something for everybody. Like I said, even the sport mode changes the dynamics of how the general steering and feel of the car is, which is kind of a neat touch that changes everything up a little bit depending on what you're looking for. So that being said, if you are interested in checking this vehicle out for yourself, be sure to go ahead and check out your nearest Toyota dealer and see what they've got going on. This is the brand new 2023 version after all, so this has all of the brand new goodies. And if you guys enjoyed this video and could actually smash that like button for me, I'd really appreciate it, and get subscribed for more content like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching.